let us start, please, if we, in the interest of time, with Minister Paul Wheelhouse, who is he has an economic background by profession, including the impact assessment of capital projects. He has played a number of important roles within the Scottish Parliament, and he since 2016 he is serving as Minister for Energy, Connectivity, and the Islands. Has given thought about this connection between cultural heritage and climate change. And Minister Wheelhouse, please. Thank you.
Well, good day to you all, and it's my delight to be here today to address this audience, and I think it's a very important subject that we're discussing today, so it's a pleasure to be here. But the historic environment, for those who aren't familiar with Scotland, is very important to Scotland. And just purely in economic terms, to pick up the point, my background is perhaps something I latch onto. It's obviously very important for its altruistic reasons, and its importance for cultural heritage. But in the case of Scotland, the historic environment has helped generate over £2.3 billion in added value to Scotland's economy in 2015-16. So we're a relatively small country, so that's a very substantial share of our annual economy, depending on tourism and cultural heritage. Scotland's tourism sector is indeed large and it's growing, and we're known for our historic towns and cities, castles and indeed landscapes, and also ancient civilization in terms of Neolithic sites going back to thousands of years ago. But it's also key to remember that historic environment is part of people's everyday lives. We walk around cities such as Edinburgh and other historic communities in Scotland, but these are working environments as well, people living there, working there, and having to respect the environment in the process. Over 20% of our domestic housing stock was built prior to 1919. It's the accepted cut-off point before which we used traditional materials and building methods. The last two properties that I have personally lived in were built in 1796 and 1908. Neither of them's a castle, by the way, in case you have any impression of that, but one a fishing cottage, another one built for a veterinarian. And that is the most it's quite typical in Scotland. It's not an unusual situation for people to living in very old properties and all the challenges that come with that, respecting the heritage and bringing them into modern usage as well. But we feel that the historic environment in Scotland has a role to play in combating climate change in a number of ways. It's far from being exempt from action, of course. Some issues are particularly challenging, such as installing energy efficient measures in very old buildings, such as the ones I've described, and specific solutions are required in order to retain aspects such as their historic character, which is what makes them so special in the first place, of course. In response, our agency, Historic Environment Scotland, who are responsible for looking after Scotland's historic built and environmental heritage, produced its first carbon management plan in 2011 within the framework from our first climate change legislation, which was in 2009, the Climate Change Scotland Act 2009. And since then, it has reduced carbon emissions across all of its operations, energy, travel, waste, and indeed water, by 11% over the baseline year of 2008-09. And this includes the energy performance from the 336 historic properties in its care. Its second carbon management plan, published in 2017, sets out ambitious targets to align with the Scottish Government's national 2050 emissions reduction target, which is currently 80%, but is likely to be updated to at least 90% in the bill that's currently going through the Scottish Parliament, which was lodged on May the 23rd. But in order to achieve these goals, the organisation requires an annual year-on-year reduction in carbon emissions of 2.2 to 2.4%. Very challenging given the nature of the state it's looking after, and indeed having to increase to around 5% each year by 2050. So we're expecting to see accelerated progress as a government as we move towards 2050 to achieve our commitments to the Paris Agreement. And this is very challenging, but it builds on solid progress to date that's been achieved, which shows just how the historic environment can contribute to meaningful emissions reductions. And to illustrate this, we can look at some carbon reduction figures from our top sites. Compared to the baseline year of 2008-09, the following reductions in carbon emissions have been made at some of the notable attractions. Edinburgh Castle, hopefully some of you will be familiar with that. You might have seen it in photographs. Most people's image of Edinburgh is usually defined by Princes Street Gardens with Edinburgh Castle behind it. That's built on a 700 million-year-old extinct volcano. It's been inhabited since the late Bronze Age, so around about 850 BC. And the buildings you see today have been built up over a long period of time, but largely have been added since the 12th century, since the reign of King David I. So it's a very old site, but it's a working site. And I'll come on to more detail of that in a minute. Glasgow Cathedral, based in Scotland's largest city, was built in 1136. So again, it's still a working, functioning building, a religious site, and working all the time. Duff House, which is a large country house in Banff in Aberdeenshire in the north of Scotland, was built between 1735 and 1740 and is still very much a working building. And the Palace of Holyrood House, or otherwise known as Holyrood Palace, the Queen's residence in Scotland, has had emissions reduction 39%. So we've had 40% reduction in Edinburgh Castle, 39% reduction at Glasgow Cathedral, 47% reduction at Duff House, and 39% at Holyrood Palace itself, which was built between 1501 and 1505. So these are very old buildings, and it shows what can be done while very much respecting their built heritage at the same time. Now, these extraordinary results have been achieved by focusing on our resources on our largest sites, the ones that have the greatest carbon emissions, the largest number of visitors, and also ones which have great antiquity as well. And a range of carbon reduction initiatives have taken place. And as an example, I'll go into more detail on Edinburgh Castle and some of the carbon reduction programme there. Edinburgh Castle is the largest site in the portfolio of Historic Environment Scotland. It's one of the most important heritage sites in the UK. It's a complex site at the centre of Scotland's capital city, beautiful city, comprising 28 buildings across 2.8 acres of land. It's an active military site because it's still got a public duties detachment of the Royal Regiment of Scotland there and other units, with shared occupancy including Historic Environment Scotland, the Army, as I say, National Museums of Scotland, and some retail outlets for the tourism activity that happens there. It's the largest energy user in the Historic Environment Scotland estate. Indeed, about a third of the Historic Environment Scotland energy consumption annually is used in that one site, and typically about the power consumption of 280 households in Scotland. And as well as being the national icon and a scheduled monument of international significance in a World Heritage Site, it's a major tourist attraction. Visitor numbers have rapidly increased from around 1.1 million in 2008-09, the baseline year, to over 2 million visitors in 2017-18. So amidst all the growth and usage, we've had to lower emissions, and they have achieved that by a very impressive 40%. But over the last 7 years, there's been a series of energy reduction measures involving a combination of works to building fabric and systems and engaging with people and behaviours. And in that aspect, the behavioural aspect is really important because we can achieve nothing if we don't also affect the behaviours of those using the buildings. You can make all the alterations to it you like, but unless people change their behaviours and take advantage of the innovation you put into the building, it's not going to make a difference. So the energy efficiency work includes replacement of old inefficient boilers, heat recovery systems, changing lighting to low energy LED lighting, thermal insulation, lagging of pipes to avoid heat loss, improved controls and monitoring of energy use. And time has also been invested working with staff on site to form an energy focus group of users of the building to enable regular dialogue and discussion, plus climate change awareness training, and encourage good behavioural practice, including simple measures such as closing doors, turning down thermostats and radiators to make sure you're not overheating space when it's not required. But from the 2008-09 baseline year, there have been consistent reductions in energy consumption each year, and this has produced an overall 30% reduction in energy usage, which is estimated to have delivered a 40% reduction in carbon emissions, having worked that through in terms of the sources of the energy. And this is a reminder, despite the almost doubling of visitor numbers over this time, so you can indeed grow a business, you can grow an economy while lowering your energy consumption and your impact on the environment, which is very important. It's also important to stress too that carbon reduction makes good business sense, as at Edinburgh Castle, as a result of the work undertaken on energy efficiency, there are annual financial savings of over £100,000 sterling per year on utility bills. So that's just one site. So that's a significant saving for our agency, and the financial investment in improvements and upgrades through a kind of invest to save approach was paid back in approximately 5 years. So subsequent years, of course, that money is then released into general investment into the site and to the business. So in summary, Edinburgh Castle example shows that even our cultural icons can contribute to the addressing the climate change agenda, and such sites can, of course, be more challenging, but our experience shows it's not possible to do everything, but there is always something that can be done, And emissions reduction makes economic sense too. So it's not just, if you like, the smart thing to do, it's also the right thing to do as well. It results in reduced energy bills, more efficient systems, allowing us to grow visitor numbers, while being confident that's not going to do damage to the environment as well, which is important. The example focuses on mitigation and emissions reduction, but other aspects of climate change agenda can also bring positive opportunities. Adaptation of the historic environment is vitally important to protect it against the physical impacts of climate change. One of the first lines of defence here is to ensure the ongoing repair and maintenance of historic assets. And in many cases, this is best done using traditional materials and skills, providing opportunities for jobs, for training, and for local material supply chains. And in the Scottish context, a really good example of this is a building in stone, where a developing stone industry has collectively formed the Scottish Stone Group, which I was delighted to help launch in the Scottish Parliament. And that has certainly delivered an opportunity to use stone, Scottish-based stone, in restoration and refurbishment of our stone buildings. Scotland has, we believe, more stone buildings per head of population. It's an unusual metric, I know, but it's one we're going to use. We're a small country, so we have to find our successes. But we have more stone buildings per head of population than we believe anywhere else in the world. And over 85% of the stone is now imported from overseas, a lot of it from China. That's nothing against the Chinese market. But it is less likely to be a direct match for the stone that's been used in the buildings back in Scotland. And of course, we're concerned about climate emissions, and transporting stone halfway around the world seems an odd thing to do. So the enhancement of the Scottish Stone Group also helps us perhaps to enhance the resilience of our historic sites. That can also really reveal economic opportunities in terms of that particular sector, broadening economic sustainability and reducing our greenhouse gas emissions associated with shipment of stone. So that's just a nice little story. If we get it right, it could work very favourably. So in conclusion, cultural heritage has a recognised and important role to play in addressing climate change. Never lose sight of the fact that ordinary members of the public as well, when they're trying to understand what climate change means, these buildings matter to them. They really do matter. If they see a building getting damaged because of climate change, or they see that you're able to achieve something spectacular in terms of emission reduction in a historic building, then it makes it all the more achievable. You can do it in your own property, with, built with brick or breeze block. It shows what can be done, but it also helps to provide a reference point for climate change. An example in Scotland that I'm aware of, I visited a Neolithic site in the Western Isles recently called Callanish. It's a stone circle, which was a Neolithic site. And the landscape has changed fundamentally since that was built. So they've actually got a 3D model of the site as it was, with the landscape as it was. And you can see this entire valley flooded now that wasn't before. So things like that can help people visualize the effect of climate change over a relatively short period of time. And that also helps resonate with the messages we're trying to get about why you need to tackle climate change now, because worse will come down the line. So never lose sight of that. But cultural heritage is our link with the past, and it tells a story of who we are, and so it's important to us going forward. In the light of climate change, the major threat facing us today, all of us here, the continuity of our material culture should be considered well alongside other aspects of society. But it can also make, as I say, a very strong contribution to helping us go forward. That's all I have to say, but thanks very much, and I wish you every success with the event today. Thank you.